All right, good morning. Session is going to be on Endpoint Protection 2012, an overview, which is now part of Configuration Manager, at least from an architectural standpoint, still officially a separate product, but it's included in the core installation of ConfigMan 2012. So we're going to walk you through that. I'm Jason. I'm a Senior Program Manager on the Configuration Manager team.
My name is Mark Florida. I'm a lead program manager on the Config Manager team as well. Thank you.
So just a quick intro before we jump in. It was about, I don't know, what was it, Mark, about a year ago?
Yeah, roughly.
Okay.
Maybe even sooner than that. But
okay.
Yeah.
That Mark came to a small group of us and said, okay, we need to integrate endpoint protection into the Config Manager product, and here's everything you need to do, and don't make us miss our ship date. So, like, okay, great, no pressure. So for about a year, we spent getting all these pieces into the product, and that's what we're going to show you today. I want to recognize one customer that's helped us tremendously. All of our TAP customers have helped us, obviously, but one TAP customer in particular, that was the first one to go to RC with the integrated version of endpoint protection, and that's Medical University of South Carolina. Clay is here, so I want to just recognize Clay for all the help they did in helping us with the product. A lot of the stuff we hope we got right is a result of these guys really providing a lot of great feedback and spending a lot of time on site with us. They've been with Forefront and now Endpoint Protection, or System Center Endpoint Protection, for a long time, from FCS on. So Clay's your guy if you want to talk about how people in the real world use it. So no pressure, Clay. Say good things. Okay, so the objectives today, we're going to talk a little bit about the evolution of malware. Then we're going to go through the overview section. Mark's going to take you through some of the client deployment, some of the prep work you have to do. Then we're going to do demos on the endpoint protection client installation. And then I'm going to spend a decent amount of time on the power of management and security together. It's one of the big differentiators of this integration of anti-malware into Configuration Manager is the ability to not only protect yourself from malware, but all of the other security features built into the management product that is Configuration Manager. So I want to tie those together in the demo that I'm going to do. And then we're going to end with just an overview of the endpoint protection client, some of the protection technology that goes into that as well. So let's just jump in. So way back in 1991, there were around 1,000 known threats. In 2001, there were 60,000 threats. Today, there are millions. There are millions of threats. A lot of them are the same threat, refactored in different ways. So there are literally millions of threats out there that can impact your business. The sophistication and production rates continue to evolve. People are getting really, really good at creating these things. For example, well, the next bullet is where I'm going. Anybody can really do it. There are full malware suites available online. I'm not going to give any links to those sites, but there are malware suites online where you can effectively buy a 1 million node botnet with guaranteed traffic to your phishing site for around $20,000 US. So that's part of the evolution of malware, is that it's become almost a commodity that somebody else produces, and I'll talk about in the next slide the personas that are involved in this whole chain of events that result in this malware that we fight continuously day after day after day. And the last bullet is your stuff is worth money to them, and they want it. So our integration of anti-malware into our management product is a way to really protect your things, protect your stuff, and protect that important data that is valuable to your company and also very valuable to the people that want it. So in this nefarious persona slide, on the left-hand side here, there are the different reasons why folks are interested in your stuff. National interest, there's personal gain, there's personal fame, and curiosity. And at the bottom, there is the level of expertise that these various personas have in attaining these various levels. And that's, your script kiddie, hobbyist, expert, and specialist. So at the bottom left, you have, let me just expose most of these here. So the fastest growing segment is what I mentioned earlier, are the tools created by experts and used by less skilled attackers. So the experts provide those sites that have like offsite storage of the data that they obtain, all of the actual malware, the binaries that go out to systems, the phishing sites that get data off your systems. They turn around and resell these things so that the thief that wants to make money off of this can actually use the tools that they really have no idea how to build on their own and get your stuff and you make money off of it. So what do we do about this? I'm going to turn it over to Mark now to talk about the first step in the integration of endpoint protection into Configuration Manager.
Thanks, Jason. So, over the past year or so, we've been talking about the unification or the operationalizing security and management together. And we started that with Forefront Endpoint Protection 2010, and we've taken further steps to bring that unification to a truer sense in System Center 2012 Endpoint Protection. So what I have here in these first two pillars is really some investments that we made in 2012 around unifying the infrastructure and also simplifying the administrative experience. Really, we were trying to focus on, how do we present a product that's comfortable to a security admin so they don't need to know a lot about traditional config manager mechanics when it's just not necessary for them to complete tasks. Or how do we get it so that you can quickly deploy the product without a heavy infrastructure footprint, or to just be able to reuse your infrastructure footprint that you already have in place with Config Manager 2012. And the last piece is we've also tried to make some improvements just in terms of our pure protection capabilities, which we'll go through later as well. So let me kind of dive in deeper into the topic that Jason started, which is that as we sort of looked at bringing these two products together, bringing security and management together, we quickly realized that it's not just about let's put endpoint protection into Config Manager and let you administer it from there. It's really looking at the other parts of Configuration Manager and trying to complete a complete circle in terms of providing an ability to not only defend against threats that are out there, but to help fix up your environment when an issue does occur. And that's really what we're trying to show here in this sort of top-level slide, is that security isn't just about anti-malware. It's also about update management. It's also about how do you remediate clients once you've gotten into a situation. How can you leverage our settings management feature for that? How can you leverage software distribution to help fix up clients? It's really providing a complete end-to-end story is what we were primarily focused on. So to kind of drill into this top pillar just a little bit, and I'll go into each of these sections here, is, again, it was around how do we take a look at where we were at with Forefront Endpoint Protection 2010, with Configuration Manager 2007, and how do we make that infrastructure deployment story easier? How do we look at it not as a, I think as I talked before in the past, it was more of a, how do we install on top of Configuration Manager? We don't want that anymore. Instead, what we wanted is, let's just make it part of the product. Let's actually complete that promise of just flip a switch, turn a key, and it'll work for you. You don't have to deploy a lot of extra, databases, really understand sort of a separation. We don't want it riding on top of the product. We want it running within the product. And you'll see that kind of ripple through in those remaining 3 points, is we've done a lot to simplify how anti-malware policies are not only authored, but deployed, as well as how you might have to troubleshoot them to make sure that they were deployed correctly. And then the other thing, too, is we really looked at what could we do with our software updates feature to really optimize some experiences for anti-malware. And then last is really taking a look at the client and making sure we can get the client with the necessary definition updates with the policies installed as quickly as possible to really get those clients on there and have your systems protected as well as we can. So this is the Forefront Endpoint Protection 2010 architecture slide. You'll see a lot of boxes here, number of pieces of database components. It works, it's a good solution. It was a good first step. But it has a lot of moving parts. And the downside with moving parts is it just increases support costs, makes it more complicated to deploy. So what we first focused on doing was trying to eliminate a lot of duplicate concepts. For example, Forefront Endpoint Protection had its own database, had its own reporting systems. that's not necessary. Configuration Manager already has a database, already has a way to do reports. Let's just integrate that all into how Configuration Manager does that for features that it has within its side of its feature, or inside of its product. The next thing that we looked at was how do we take the, let's say the endpoint protection client is a good example on this slide, and how do we get it so that you don't necessarily have to use software distribution to deploy that, where you have to manage a package, you have to understand how the content distribution system works, you have to understand how software distribution works in general. How do we alleviate that from a security admin and just simply make it a checkbox feature in our product? The next thing that we did was we took a look at anti-malware policies, and again, kind of very similar to the endpoint protection client. For those that know Forefront Endpoint Protection 2010, anti-malware policies really just rode on top of software distribution. It worked, it was functional, it provided what you needed. The problem though, and the downside again, was in order for a security admin to really kind of operate, they had to understand software distribution. They had to understand the latency and how that system works in order to get your policies there. What we've done is we've integrated anti-malware policy to work within normal configuration manager policy. That means clients can quickly get new policy. It means that you don't have to rely on the software distribution feature. You don't have distribution points. You don't have to have that type of infrastructure. It's just all within inside our normal client mechanics. Once you get your configuration manager client deployed, it's as simple as just checking a box in client agent settings to enable the endpoint protection client itself. And then these policies will start to come down and you can manage them. Very similar to how you might have managed them in Forefront Endpoint Protection 2010, but it's just a much more integrated experience to make that overall life cycle much simpler for you. The other thing too, just to make sure, is we didn't deprecate anything that you may have been accustomed to. So we still have those out-of-box templates that people are used to using. So if you need a protection profile, if you need a protection policy for high security or even for a config manager server, we still have that type of functionality. Still have the ability to import and export and do merge. And we have a fairly simple thing, which I'll show in the demo, around how we resolve policy conflicts. The software updates investment that we made was to try to get the administrator out of having to use WSUS automatic deployment rules. There's a couple advantages of that. One is you can do everything within the console, but probably the biggest thing is that you can leverage our distribution points. So what you can do is using the existing software updates feature, where you can leverage our automatic our auto deployment rules, not just for definition updates, but even for Patch Tuesday scenarios. Your normal software updates admin can create these rules once, implement them in the configuration manager admin console, and then it'll use the existing infrastructure that's already there for software updates. In terms of client setup, I think I've hit on a number of these points as well, but a few things to kind of call out is that if you're a customer who already has Configuration Manager deployed, we have a very simple mechanism to be able to install endpoint protection. Again, it's just checking a box. I should actually not say checking a box. You'll soon see it's a drop-down, but it is just a single check that you need to make in client settings. We also have ways in order for it to be installed, let's say during an operating system deployment, where you want to get that client installed as quick as possible, or you have a brand new machine, you want to have it done. Jason's written a few very good blogs on that topic, which we'll link at the end of this session. The other thing that we do too, just to kind of preserve that kind of upgrade story, is we still support removing of third-party AM products as well, where we have the list there at the bottom of the screen. So rather than talking, let me hop into the demo and kind of show you what this looks like. That is not the best sign you want to see. All right, good deal. So when you're getting when you get endpoint protection and you want to deploy it, there's a couple things I'm not going to go into just for the interest of the audience. With this assumption is there's a config manager site server already set up. You have the actual config manager client already deployed in this scenario. So I'm really kind of entering it as a decision of I want to use endpoint protection, the product, on top of configuration manager. So some of the best practice steps we recommend is that prior to actually enabling the endpoint protection client, what we recommend is that you first set up your anti-malware policies, as well as get your updates, your definition files taken down from Windows Update, deployed out, to your client's distribution points, so that when you actually install your endpoint protection client, they're protected, they're running the policies that you want to have run as well. So I'm going to walk you through those two steps, and then I'll show you what it looks like to actually install the client. So right here is our anti-malware policies. We have a default policy that just comes when you literally install the product itself, or enable the product, I should say. However, you can still import, you can still choose from a set of templates. If you want to manage, let's say, the config manager server, it comes with a set of exclusions that are appropriate to really manage the performance on a config manager server. In terms of properties, let's see if this works. Perfect. It's the same type of classifications if you're familiar with Forefront Endpoint Protection 2010. Same type of, we call them setting groups that you would be accustomed to seeing in that product. You can set scan schedules, pick exclusions, enable, disable, real time. Not a terrible amount of new investments per se in the actual options that are here. There's been some level of changes, but if you are familiar with 2010, this will be very similar to what you've been used to. Again, set the schedule, do things like that. Let's see here. The other thing that you can do too, which is kind of worth noting, is one of the services too that Microsoft has is the Microsoft Active Protection Service. It's a great way in order to subscribe, get real-time feedback in terms of threats that are out there for your clients. So we recommend people taking a look at that as an option to use too. But again, this is kind of a default policy. It'll apply everywhere, and I can certainly go and create custom policies as well if I want to do that. So that policy's in place. It'll just work. The next piece that I want to show you is we create, what we recommend creating is an auto deployment rule. So an auto deployment rule, again, is this thing that you ideally set up once, and then the system just runs at a frequency to automatically grab updates and deploy them out to clients. So what I did is I created one just before we got on stage, and I'll show you what that looks like. So what you're able to do is you're able to define based on criteria that you would normally define when you're picking just regular updates. You can define, I'd like to see updates that matches a criteria like the one here. I'm looking for definition updates, and I want to be able to grab automatically only definition updates. Then what we support is setting of a schedule. So as an administrator, what you can do is you can define, how often you want to not only sync to WooMoo in order to get your latest definition updates, but what you can also do is set how frequently you want to be able to do the deployments as well. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have clicked there. So again, this is great in that you basically have to set, for anti-malware scenarios, you basically set this rule once, you pick your sync frequency, let's say once a day, and then you're done. This is just hands off. There's not a whole lot to do on this. What will happen is that every day, or whatever that frequency is, we'll basically connect, download the definition updates for you, and then end up deploying those out to your distribution points, and then your clients every day will run a scan and attempt to grab those definition updates as well. So now that you've kind of completed, let's say, the two steps that we recommend, you have your policy going out, you have that, it's a default policy which I was using, so it'll apply to all clients, and now you have this this automatic deployment rule, which is going out and grabbing all your definition updates. The last step is simply to enable the endpoint protection client. So very similar to anti-malware policies, the config manager client itself has a default policy. I'm not going to modify that because let's say I want to uniquely target endpoint protection to a test environment or a small population, and I want to just make sure it meets my requirements.
One point on that, default client settings, if you enable endpoint protection, you're targeting all systems, so you'll upgrade quickly, but you may not be wanting to do that. So custom client agent settings is the way to go there.
Perfect. So what I'm going to do is just create a single one. I'm not going to go too much into client agent settings and how that works. But what I'm doing is I'm just being very specific about endpoint protection. I'm not going to mess around with remote control or any of other settings that are in there. And that's great because what you can do is create these really kind of small client settings which you can uniquely target out. And this is really where your main operation has to happen. It's that second checkbox there. In order to install the client, it's as easy as just setting that to true. And then we have some other options that if you do need to customize the experience for, you want to control, how you want to show reboots to end users, you want to control whether or not to remove third-party software. There's some other options to handle there. But, for the vast majority of the scenarios, it's really just as easy as setting this to true, and clicking OK. And now, once this has been created, since it's not my default client agent setting, I have to target it. I have to target it to whatever that kind of population that I want to, as Jason said, do a rollout, make sure it's kind of the right, speed of deployment I want to hit. So what I'm going to do is deploy this out to the all desktop server collection, and that's about it. It's as easy as that. So what's happening now in the background, and we'll cut back to the deck here, is that we've, in essence, created a series of policies. We've created a policy for your anti-malware policy. We've created another one for definition updates. And now we've also told the config manager client to go ahead and install the endpoint protection client. So kind of the system is going to now work for a few minutes, and what it's going to do is, hopefully, for your sake, it'll all work, and we'll have a functioning endpoint protection client.
Thanks, Mark. See, it's so easy, even my manager can do it.
Oh, that's cold.
One thing to mention, the orchestration piece
Just a second. Were you planning on filing an expense report?
No, I haven't submitted any money yet. No. Good point, though. What that orchestration of that client piece, what's going to happen there is since we optimized for definition updates or for auto deployment rules, it was in that client agent setting view that Mark had up. The client will install, will apply the desired policy, whatever that is, whatever you've configured that to be. Then we'll kick off a deployment evaluation for software update management, and we'll get the definition and initial engine update from the software update feature. And like Mark said, that'll come from the local distribution point. That's a 50 or 60 to 70 meg payload. So it's really nice to be able to put that really close to your client. So that's a key feature to keep in mind to bring all those components together. So the next piece around that I'm going to talk about is really the simplified administration. I'm going to spend a good chunk of the demo on this very first box here, this single interface for client management and security. And I'll get more in depth in that in the context of the demo. So just keep that in mind. That's where we're headed next. There's improved alerting, client to admin within 5 minutes with reporting, real-time and user-centric data views. And we'll get into that a little bit in the next section. So let me talk about, first off, the single interface. So the design approach we took to integrating endpoint protection into Configuration Manager 2012 was this single interface or single dashboard experience. It was really focused on operational actions. And I'll show this live when I get to the demo, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking you through it. But the very first box you see there, the green checkbox, and I'll zoom in on it when I actually get to the demo box. It's really focused on how protected you are. It's just a single state. It's your get to green state. So that's your first thing that your eyes should go to is how safe am I? Then as you go through the other states, again, I'll get through in the demo, they're all drillable. You can click on any of those states where security might be compromised, and you get an asset list view. We call it a sticky node for internal geek parlance, but it's just basically a temporary list of assets that are showing that condition. From that view, then you can start taking action. So our design principle here was now don't make the admin jump between reports and the console to get any remediation steps needed to be taken, but put that right there in the dashboard so you can get right from the dashboard status right into the asset view and then generate that remediation action from there. The other thing at the bottom here, flexibility to separate security admin role. We have an out-of-box. You guys are probably familiar with the role-based access and how our console can show just the objects that you need for your role, and you can also secure the objects that are in that view as well. So we do have an out-of-box role administrator for endpoint protection, and you can use that role, and your EP or endpoint protection administrator can just do endpoint protection related actions. He's not going to be out deploying operating systems or software, just dealing with the endpoint protection piece. So that's a big addition in Configuration Manager 12 and endpoint protection together.
Yeah, more on that role base. What's really great about the integration we did is because we're no longer relying on software distribution, we basically created unique objects just for endpoint protection, which means that we can really just secure to that level. You don't have to worry about, can somebody, because they have to deploy, let's say, the client, or they're deploying policy through software distribution, how do I manage that labyrinth of permissions that they had to manage back with Forefront Endpoint Protection 2010? So we've really just made it as simple as just, putting an admin role, in the product. It's that easy now.
So for monitoring client security, we have this alerts and event concept that is, our goal is to meet a 5-minute SLA. And we have achieved that in test, and that 5-minute SLA is a statement of our largest support size of 400,000 clients, so that we rapidly get information that you need for security up to your console and into your inbox so you can take action on those events. The way we did this is we implemented what we call the high-speed data channel. It's basically a superhighway for security-related events. Effectively, what happens here is that when a state change happens on a client in WMI for anything related to malware, new infection, definition version change, a health issue, we're listening for that on an every 30-second basis. As soon as we see a change, we send that up within a minute through our state message system, as opposed to the 15-minute wait we have for typical state messages. When that state message comes up, it also goes to a special folder that gets processed ahead of anything else. So you don't have important or critical security events sitting there lined up behind hardware inventory that has to be processed, which is less important to you operationally. So that's how we really achieve that under 5-minute SLA of malware event on the client all the way up to the dashboard. And we also have our alerts wired up to email, so you can also email details about that event, which will tell you hey, you need to go look in your console because you have, say, a malware outbreak, or you have some malware requiring follow-up actions, etc. And I'll show that in the demo as well. One last bullet here, and this is something I'll probably forget to talk about in the demo. This email subscriptions is new to, Forefront Endpoint Protection had the same email alerting system, but the subscription model is new in the sense that you can subscribe an alias or a distribution list to a particular event without defining them as admins in the console. So if you have a corporate security team that wants to be aware of malware activity, but you don't really want them in the console, then you could just put their alias as a subscriber to those events, and then they just get the email when that particular malware event occurs. So it's for awareness. There's nothing preventing you, because of the RBA, you could put them in console, but it's a way to alert people that may not be the one taking the actual action in console for that event. So the reporting services we provide are similar. Our goal was to have parity with Forefront Endpoint Protection 2010 reports. We did add one key report, which is actually really cool, and that's top users by threats. It's a great way to, one of your biggest weakness probably in your fight against malware is the end user. They're the ones that click on the links, they're the ones that go to the sites. So the top users by threats takes advantage of all the rich data we get out of Configuration Manager and ties those threats to a user. So you have this nice report that tells you which user is getting infected most often and which malware they're actually getting, which could be take top 10 user, implement training. Stop clicking on those links. So it's a great way to really understand, another great way to really understand your threat surface from the primary entry point of malware into your environment, and that is, in fact, the end user. Last point here, and I have a blog on how to do this. Again, those are all linked in the back, and that's the customizable reports. With the integration into the Configuration Manager database, it's very straightforward with just basic SQL query knowledge to create some really slick customizable reports or customized reports because the views are all integrated into the Configuration Manager schema. For example, you may want to see what is your infection rate by AD site. Well, you get your infection rate from the anti-malware channel through Endpoint Protection. You get your AD site information from inventory data coming back from Configuration Manager. You do a simple join on resource ID, and you basically have a heat map of which sites are getting infected the most often. It's basically a 3-line query. So I have some examples of that in my blog. We have Report Builder 3.0 built into the product, so you can easily publish those to SRS, so that your administrators or your business owners also have visibility into whatever report they ask you for that monitors security. So check out my blog on that. It's a pretty straightforward process with just basic SQL query skills, and you should be able to create whatever reports you can dream up to take advantage of all that awesome config manager data and anti-malware data through Endpoint Protection. Okay, I'm going to start my demo, and I'm going to take a sip of water real quick. So. You want to tell a joke?
Geez, that's a tough one. Right on the spot, and you're asking me to tell jokes?
Okay, I'll drink quickly.
Yeah. I'm just hoping the demo's going to work.
I do too. I hope that client
Is
install works.
this a shameless stall technique right
It
here?
absolutely
Yes.
is.
All
I
right,
actually
good.
should have done this later because I got to really stall in a minute. Okay, so I'm going to cut over to my client that my dear leader here deployed. Let's see if he did it right.
Probably not.
Let's see here. Make sure I'm on the right client. So this is client 1. Okay. And let's see if we have endpoint protection. Hey, look, it worked. Well done, sir. So we have endpoint protection client installed. We'll get into the client UI in a second here. But what I'm going to do now is basically the equivalent of, since we're in Vegas, the equivalent of spinning plates. I'm just going to create a bunch of malware on both of my clients and let it flow up through the system and see what happens. And then show you the results in the dashboard and walk you a little bit more through how you interact or how you fix these malware issues using the power of management and security together. So I'm going to use my handy magic threat generator here. I'm going to go to my special threat section. And let's see, what do we want to do this guy? Let's make him have a reboot required malware. Let's generate a Callisto, which is an internal name for Defender Offline Scan, which I also blog about. It's a new tool just released recently that you can use to boot systems into WinPE to clean out rootkits and when you're unloaded from the full OS. And my blog talks about how you can use the OSD feature in Config Manager to do that. And so I'm going to launch one of those malware types. Callisto is the code name, so that's still called Callisto in my tool, but that's what I'm doing here. Okay, so I got those two malware types on that client. And I'm going to cut over to my second client, and I'm just going to give him a pretty simple one, just full scan required. And go ahead and clean that guy. Okay. Though we do have the high-speed data channel, this is stall time. So I'm going to take a drink of water. Sorry, what? Oh, the question was, can you deploy the viruses with Config Manager? Absolutely, yeah. It's a great use of the tool. If you want a scale test, you just whip this out and send it out to make an app out of it.
If anyone wants a botnet later, you can talk to this guy.
Yeah, I've got a 1995 on a memory stick out front. Talk to me. All right, so that malware is in the process of being cleaned. Let's go back to our site server. And actually, I may have stalled too long, but what I wanted to do next is go into my collections, all desktops and servers, and I wanted to create one of those alerts I was talking about. So the alerts are done per collection. So you can customize those by any grouping of system you want to do it. So you can do, some critical machines. You may want every malware hits those machines you want to know about. Your general population, you may just want to know about malware with pending actions. Or you may want to just know when you reach a threshold. 20% infection, that's probably not good. You want to look into that. But every collection has the ability to set your own eventing standards for each one. So I'm just going to do all desktops and servers here. And it's this little tab. It looks like it's about to jump off the cliff over here. I don't know how that happened.
Might fall off.
It's the lemming tab on our UI. You click Add here. We're just going to do a simple malware is detected event. And we're going to set the detection to medium. We have the option here of high, medium, or low. High means you're going to get every detection, which could be a lot. Fun for the test lab, but probably not great for production. Medium is detected, but you need to do something. That's probably the right level, because those ones are going to tell you, hey, you just got malware that requires Defender Offline Scan. You may want to go look at that. So we're going to do that, and just click OK here. But one thing I'll mention, again, buying time. View this collection in the endpoint protection. Uh-oh. Ooh, that's not good.
No.
I think someone else hit the demo box. I did not do that to buy more time, I promise. Okay. Well, over to backup. If you want to try to get that back up, I'll cut over to this one.
Is this the IP?
Sorry about that, guys. The IP for primary is this one here. It's not on there. It's 1052.2084. Oh, it's config manager domain. Config manager DOM.
What is it?
Config manager DOM.
Like that?
Yeah, and just password paste. Okay, well, we have a backup box. So let me cut over to that. And I will move over to this one. So what we did here, or what you'll see here, is what the resolution's like on this one. But what you see on the screen is my dashboard. And I'll go up to my alerts because I pre-created an alert here. So the first thing you're going to see, let me zoom in, is this alert got generated. This alert got generated because I set that alert threshold to detect on a pending action malware. And you'll see this alert in console. You'd also see this in the overview page. If I'd had email set up, I'd have also gotten an email in my inbox to tell me I have malware of this classification that I need to go look at. So if we go from here, we're going to cut down to the dashboard. And what I have in my dashboard here is, we'll start at the top left of this screen. And I guess I can zoom in just so you can see that better. What you'll see here is that first get to green state. We're not doing too good. We're 0.0%. That's not a good sign. We also put the total devices in the collection because we always want to have a common denominator. This is security, so we always want to let you know. We want to account for everything. So if you have all desktops and servers, every client, everything in this list will add up to the total devices in the collection. We account for everything in that view so that you know we're not just hiding something from you. Occasionally, config manager is not necessarily, all the numbers haven't always added up. So we want to make sure they add up because this is very important information. So you can see here I have 3 active clients at risk. Those active clients at risk, I'll show you what you can do from that view. You can drill through, and what you get is a list of all the clients that are in a risk state. And so that's just the highest level view of these clients are in trouble. Now let's go back to the dashboard because we really need a little bit more specifics about, okay, great, they're in trouble, what do I do next? So let's just go back to my dashboard, and I can see from this view that I have one instance of a full scan required, one instance of restart required, and one instance of offline scan required, which magically is exactly what I did on the box that disappeared on us. So to prepare that might happen. So these are the exact states I generated through my threat generator tool. And what this tells me is that I have these 3 things to go do. Again, I have another blog on this. I'm starting to think maybe it's not clear enough if I have to write a blog on every topic I talk about today, but there's another blog on this on how to interpret these states. That's not out yet. That'll be out shortly after MMS, but it defines all these states, it defines the workloads, and gives some exportable collections, et cetera, that'll help you out with this. But the first thing I need to do here is I want to go to the client where full scan's required. This is the easiest state to remediate because it's an operational action that we just have out of box. So I'm going to slide over here, and this is going to show us all of the pending actions on this particular client. So this client has a pending full scan. It has no pending manual steps, no pending offline scan, and no pending reboot. So that's good. We just have one thing we have to do to this client to get it out of this bad state. The states you see there, and sorry, this may get a little confusing. This is why I blogged about it because it's a little confusing. These are system level states. So this could be one malware causing 4 things you have to go do, or it could be 4 malware, each one of them causing a different thing you have to go do. The way you tell exactly what's happening to the client on a per malware basis is this malware detail pane down here. And I'm going to add a column for pending action. But and a note on the malware detail pane, and let me zoom in on this and bring this action over here and zoom in. The malware detail tab is a per asset tab that shows you all the malware history of every client in your environment. So you can go to that list view, you can hit the malware detail tab, and you can just scroll through your clients. You can see the malware detail on each one of those, which is super handy to have right at your fingertips. You don't have to cut over to reports to do that. To give Clay over there credit for that. That was one of their ideas, so thank you for that. And this pending action value here, these are all defined. These numerical values are all defined in the appendix of this deck. They'll also be defined in my blog. But they relate to what you see on the machine level. So a 4 in this instance means full scan required. 8 would mean restart required, so on and so on. So what you can do is you can add this pending action column for every malware per asset and see which one exactly is resulting in all these things you have to do to the client. So it's not something you have to do, but if you're interested in what exact malware caused this problem, you can easily do that by adding this pending action column to the malware detail tab. The thing to mention here is that, this sounds like it's fairly cumbersome to do all this. These pending action malware states are not a high percentage of your malware cleaned. We're looking at probably, in our customer data, we see about 1.5% of all malware found and cleaned results in this state. So it's not something you're going to have to do 10 times a day or anything like that. It's just something to keep your eye out for. But what I'm trying to stress here is the benefit of management and security together and how you are able to interact, how you are able to solve these problems. So this one's easy. Full scan required. We right-click. You can also multi-select and right-click. We choose endpoint protection actions that we can do, and we force a full scan. It says this will affect one client. Do you want to proceed? And we say OK. That's it. That client will be full scanned and it'll be clean. So that state will disappear as soon as that client gets the policy. That policy comes down to policy polling. There's no script that has to be deployed. The client will just get the memo, hey, I need to do a full scan. It will do the full scan, and it will instantly return the state back up that I'm clean, and that will drop out of this particular state. So that's the easy one. Now let's go to a harder one. Let's go to the client that has the offline scan required. Drill through that. So same deal here, a little bit different states. Let me zoom in on this. You can see this guy has no full scan or manual steps, but it has both offline scan and pending reboot. That's because I generated 2 separate malware on this client, each one causing a different follow-up action, a different pending action. Again, using the same logic as before, if I go to my malware detail pane, I can see exactly which malware is resulting in this particular status. Again, 8 is restart required, and 32768 is offline scan, which you probably would have figured out on your own had I not said that, but I thought I'd give you a little hint that that's what that one means. So for this one, this gets a little trickier. We don't have, in this release, we don't have a right-click action to go force a Windows Defender offline scan. However, we do have an awesome feature called OSD, and we have a blog that tells you how to use OSD to solve for a client in this particular state. So what we do here is we simply build a collection dynamically for a status of offline scan required. The data is in our database. You do a simple WCL query for your collection logic, a query-based collection. The collection is a fast collection, so it adds members dynamically every 10 minutes. So as soon as the client ends up in this state of offline scan required, you have effectively targeted with an OSD deployment that will be posted in Software Center, so you can get a hold of the user and say, hey, I need you to run this. But this is all automatic. There's nothing you have to do here because the collection logic is very simple to build. It's all values that are right there that you can get to through the provider and build your dynamic collections. So since we built, and again, in my blog, I'll have a Moth export that has all these collections predefined for you, so you can import them in and use them yourself as well. I also did some logic to not duplicate efforts. If you had restart required and offline scan required, clearly you have to reboot to get into WinPE. So there's no reason to target the restart command separately. So I also targeted the actions according to if Defender offline scan restarts you, then you don't need the restart action, and both states will be cleared when the client comes back up into the full OS. So what you can see from this, I've got one client in this collection because it's infected with an offline scan required malware. And I'm going to go over to a client. I believe that was client 1 I launched that one on. Don't want to hit the restart now. I can barely get to the close. Okay. And I'm going to open up Software Center. And I'm going to see this. Hopefully, I'm going to see.
Sir.
It's the full OS one. Okay, well, I'm not seeing it. Let me check my other client. It's really not that exciting, so really all this is a line in Software Center that says Defender offline scan is available.
You're not going to walk us through WinPE?
No, I thought we could, if you want to.
It's pretty exciting.
It's pretty quick.
Yeah.
See if it's on this client. Anyway, it's really not that's really not worth going that deep into. All it is it's basically, look at my blog. It's super easy to do. You download the WIM, you mount the WIM, you inject the definitions, you unmount the WIM, you deploy it through OSD, and you target it to systems in this state. Just another great way that you can use security and management together. Tomorrow, when I talk about security and compliance together, software updates and settings management, I'll have yet another example of how you can use settings management in parallel with anti-malware to reset settings that have been modified by malware. So I'm going to save that one for tomorrow. I've got to spread my demo across and figure out who kicked me off my main box over there. And I will show you guys that tomorrow if you come to my security and compliance session. But that's really it for the security and management. I just wanted to really show that integration of the two products and how you can take advantage of all the capabilities of ConfigMan to address all of these scenarios around security management through anti-malware. So that's and then the other probably your best friend if you have 4 infections that require several hours of manual actions is Windows 7 OSD deployment with endpoint protection. Start over. That's the other option you have for a great way to clear your security problem. So let's go back to the slide deck here, and we'll just talk about the client now, the actual protection side of it, and just to give, I don't know if they're in the room or not, but we have a team a couple of teams that work on this side of the equation. It's the protection services team and the protection team that build the client. So we have the analysts that analyze all that malware that comes in and release those definition updates. And then we have a team that builds the common client platform, which is also the same client, and this should be confidence inspiring, same client platform effectively that we use for Microsoft Security Essentials, which has over 50 million deployments. So it is used widely to scale, even outside of the enterprise scenario of System Center endpoint protection. So touch briefly on this comprehensive protection stack. The main point here is to really make you think about the entire stack of protection available through various pieces of the Microsoft suite. Talking primarily around here of Windows 7 combined with System Center endpoint protection. So it goes up. We go from network, file system, application layer from top to bottom, and left to right we go reactive to proactive techniques. So this is really just separating out where endpoint protection starts and where Windows 7 and Internet Explorer start and how those combine together to keep you secure, better together story. So at the network layer, we have the endpoint protection, we have the vulnerability shielding through the network inspection system, and we have the Windows Firewall centralized management, which is also available out of the ConfigMan endpoint protection console. At the file system, going left to right, we have Internet Explorer 8 with Smart Screen, App Locker, and BitLocker. Some of you may have seen the good MBAM presentation on BitLocker management, which is a part of MDOP, which is a great way to make BitLocker enterprise manageable. And then above that, we have the anti-malware, dynamic translation, and emulation, which I'll talk about a little bit on the next slide. And then at the application layer, we have the Windows component of data execution prevention, address space layout, UAC, and Windows resource protection. And the top of that, in the anti-malware stack again, we have behavior monitoring. So the picture here is just meant to show you that there's no single solution that keeps you secure, but if you combine them all together, you're getting really, really close. And then you manage them with Config Manager, and you really have a holistic solution with one console, one operating system, a current browser version, if you're able to go that route, and the System Center endpoint protection, anti-malware protection.
Yeah, another thing to note on here too is our partners in the Solution Accelerator team have done a great job producing config packs that you can import into Configuration Manager to manage a lot of these other Microsoft products, so that you don't have to go through the trouble of kind of recreating. Oh, I need this registry key secured. And then also, just for maybe the audience who isn't really into knowing all the details of Configuration Manager, one of the big investments we made in Config Manager 2012 was we took our settings management feature and we enabled remediation. So what you can do is you basically set up these policies, such as the ones that the Solution Accelerator team releases, and be able to basically import those into our system and set them up for remediation. That way, you just, keeping machines at a desired state can be done, but also it kind of ties in with a lot of the automated, cleanup of malware scenarios that you might have. If somebody tried to tamper with some of these settings, you can use Configuration Manager to get those systems back in the state that you want them to be in.
Exactly, and that's a great teaser for tomorrow's session on security and compliance, where I go into some of the depth of the new settings management remediation changes and some of those config packs and how you can use that to really lock in these various configurations that keep your environment safer. So dynamic translation with heuristics, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but it's basically it's the way that we are able to maintain high protection and high performance together. And it's a much safer way because the dynamic translation takes place in a virtualized space and uses virtualized APIs instead of the real application. So it's a way for us to emulate suspicious behavior on the client to really look for behavior that looks suspicious that we need to do something about, whereby the engine then checks the definition and sees if it matches a value that says, hey, this is definitely a malware foo, let's get rid of this thing. So the main point to point out here is that bottom statement there that enables faster scanning and response to threats through this dynamic translation with heuristics method. Behavior monitoring again is building off what I said on the previous slide, is really tracking the behavior of unknown processes that just look fishy, they look suspicious as they enter the system, and we have multiple sensors to detect these anomalous behaviors. The follow-up on what Mark talked a little bit about in the anti-malware policy space, the critical piece to really tying the client-side protection together with the cloud service is the Microsoft Microsoft Active Protection Service, which you may know by its formerly awesome name of Spynet. And for whatever reason, no one wanted to opt into Microsoft service called Spynet. We could not figure that out, so we changed the name. Maybe they will now. But it is very important that you opt into it. And the reason being is that in these unknown detections, when it looks suspicious but we're not sure exactly what's going on, the client will make a call up to this Active Protection Service, and that Active Protection Service will then notify the client as, yeah, you definitely have something that we've recently identified. Here's a new signature. So it'll dynamically reprovision the definition on the client even before Windows Update gets it. Even before your auto deployment rule process brings the definition down and deploys it out, your client, ad hoc, and it's not going to be every client in your environment, just clients that are in this situation, will make this call to the map service and get the latest definition to solve the problem if it's a known problem. If it's not known, we'll send a request back to the client and ask for more information. The client will then send our analysts some more details about this particular suspicious behavior, which really provides them some more data that they need to interpret if this is something we need to worry about or not. So with the 50 million MSE users, plus all the enterprise users on various flavors of endpoint protection, we have a very rich community-driven approach through this MAPS opt-in, which builds our analyst knowledge base to provide those definitions which keep your client secure. So it's super, I can't stress enough how important it is to opt into at least the basic level, because you get some cloud servicing without you really having to do anything for your 0 days, for your new malware, even before we have a definition published that's publicly consumable outside of the Microsoft Malware Protection Center. The other side of this Microsoft Active Protection Service is it's called what we call signature disable notification. If we goofed, which on occasion happens, and we identify some application that shouldn't be being removed, we will also send down a signature disable notification to stop doing that to you. So that's the two sides of the equation. One is, one time is real-time signature delivery. The other side is signature disable notification. Those two together are a much more client intelligence-driven way to stay safe or to stay productive without having a lot of administrator interaction. So that's my spiel. I'll turn it back over to Mark to finish up with the client UI and the summary.
Sure. Thanks, Jason. I think kind of the key message here, and it'll be on the next slide as well, is one of the kind of our strategy pieces we're looking for when just endpoint protection in general, regardless of the two products that we've kind of started here, is that it's about balancing the end user experience. Most users, end users, they just want to be secure. They don't need to see a bunch of chattiness. They don't need to see a bunch of information that the administrator needs to see. So that was one of the kind of tenets that we've driven into the product is how do we just provide the absolute minimal end user experience to kind of meet what they're looking for, which is they don't like a bunch of pop-ups, and this doesn't hold just for endpoint protection. We get this a lot in Configuration Manager in general. How do we provide a nice experience that's for the end user, but at the same time, making sure we take care of what the administrator needs as well. So, some of the things we do too, it's not just necessarily the UI, what you might see in terms of notifications, but we also try to be smart about the impact that we have on the end user as well. Again, it's about that tenet of we just want the protection client itself to run, but never get in the way of the end user, unless there's some super critical reason why it has to be that way. Which takes us to this. So, I know Jason and myself are super proud of, having this award, for endpoint protection. Again, we had a lot of partner teams that helped with this as well, especially in the core anti-malware engine as well. But again, this is just, to us, not so much the award. I know Jason enjoyed taking it to lunch and walking around for a day or two. He was very happy with himself.
We had a wonderful day, me and the award.
Yes, but really, it's not the award so much. It's just, again, just reinforces that we want to go after making sure there's that right balance. Security is so important, but we also have to make sure we're managing the end user experience correctly as well. So that kind of takes us into a summary here. What we have here, and this may just be more reference for material for after the session, so I won't necessarily kind of bore you by going through each and all of these points. But, really kind of the high-level takeaway that, I want you to have is we've done a lot to just simplify the infrastructure. So there's not a whole lot of additional moving components in order to use endpoint protection that you may have already had in place with Configuration Manager. No duplicate databases, none of that stuff. You can truly just use the infrastructure that's there, use those components that are there, and there's not a lot of extra special things for, in order to make endpoint protection work. Good news, there's a lot of stuff that hasn't changed. So if you're kind of accustomed to some policies you've invested in terms of firewall and all that, that stuff is there, very familiar. So moving to this newer version of the product won't be a complete relearn in that area. And then this last piece was really just some critical, DCRs we heard from our customers. One of the things we've heard, and we know we haven't completed it fully yet, is speed. We know that in the security features that speed's essential. So that's why we built the highway somewhere to
superhighway.
The superhighway, the high-speed data channel, really around providing those real-time alerts. We really focused on true role-based administration, not something where it's at the UI layer. It's in the database. It's secure. You can trust security admins to be able to author policies for anti-malware because that's all they can go do. And then the other thing, too, was we wanted to sort of focus on keeping those same reports that you have, but to continually evolve, the focus of understanding threats, understanding who's impacted, so you can really try to understand better what the business impact of those threats might be. So there's some great online resources. I did nothing in these. This is all Jason, as well as a few other program managers on our team. These are wonderful resources. Really, the focus with a lot of these blogs has been, not so much a long sort of dissertation on the technology, but really trying to jumpstart you. Like he mentioned, he's provided samples. He's provided ways for you to just sort of quickly grab some things, import that into the system. So he does a great job sort of describing the end-to-end, but it's really about, how can we, bring some scenarios to light that maybe we weren't quite able to get into the product, but it's certainly things that you could use in your day-to-day job. Is there anything you want to talk more about?
I think, there are some stuff in the appendix as well of this deck for basically all of the views and tables that we've added for endpoint protection that are in the Config Manager database are all defined and all the values in there. So you know that 32784 requires offline scan. And again, that's fairly intuitive, so you may not need to know that. But if you do need that level of detail, All that's in the appendix, some best practices on using auto deployment rules, just some stuff that didn't really quite fit in the flow of the presentation. It's just kind of chock full of all the extras in there. So take a look at the appendix if you want to know more. All these resources Mark pointed out, they're how-to videos, which are actual videos of me clicking next, 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 and explaining what every page does, if you want that level of detail. The product documentation is in great form right now for all of Config Manager product. And then the last piece here is really servicing my talk tomorrow, but we think of security holistically, not in feature components, is the Security and Compliance Manager config packs that Mark mentioned. And those are great resources to really jumpstart your system hardening, your analysis of how protected your Windows OSs are. And it's a great starting point for that. Plus all the blogs. Take a look at those. There'll be more coming out. They'll all be in the same spot. Look for them by my name or look for them under our team blog site on TechNet. We'll keep producing those. So that's we finished a little early, other than the related sessions.
Yeah, we got some stock slides, related sessions. I'm sure you've seen this. And please, complete your session evals. If there's any questions, please feel free to come up to the mic or up to the stage, and we can just, talk as a group. Thank you, everyone,
Thanks,
for
guys.
attending.